Hey guys, and welcome back. Throughout human history, our hatred for another city, leader, or even country grew to a state of war. Thus, there have been thousands of battles throughout history, and today we're looking at the top 10 battles in history. Before we begin, the battles will be chosen either on importance or magnitude, and can be based in any time or era of history. Let's begin. Number 10. The Battle of Plataea. For about a year after Thermopylae, the Greek peninsula was in a state of panic. Sure, the roughly 7,000 soldiers at the battle gave Greece time to rally a larger force, but they were still wiped out by the massive Persian army. During the year after the battle, the Persians waited to gather their forces and prepared to invade Greece. This crucial opportunity gave the Greeks time to prepare their forces. On the day of the battle, the Greeks had about 40 to 60,000 men, while the Persians had around 300 to 350,000. Even though things seemed hopeless for the Greeks, their enemy still had inferior technology and overconfident leaders. The Greeks won with only a few thousand casualties. The Persians were crushed, with them losing about half their army. Number 9. The Siege of Masada. Around 73 to 74 CE, the Romans besieged the Jewish city of Masada. The reason for the year-long siege was on account of the Jewish fortress on top of a very high mountain. This made it difficult for the Romans to move siege equipment up to its walls. Eventually, they had a solution: make a massive ramp and move the army on it. This actually worked. They broke through the walls and were ready to fight oncoming defenders, but discovered that they had killed each other. Number 8. The Battle of Wisna. Considered the Polish Thermopylae, during the invasion of Poland, this was one of very few actual independent battles. Around 800 Polish soldiers under the command of Captain Władysław Reginus defended against the onslaught of 40,000 German soldiers. Armed with only 2 anti-tank cannons, 40 MGs, and 2 anti-tank rifles, they defended for 3 days. In that time, they killed around 1,000 Germans and took out hundreds of tanks. They were fighting to give the remnants of the Polish army time to reinforce Warsaw. However, most of them were killed, and their leader took his own life rather than be captured. Number 7. The Battle of Waterloo. In 1815, Napoleon regained his power and struck an encampment of Allied soldiers at Waterloo, the Netherlands. His force numbered around 100,000, but he sent 30,000 men to take out an army of Prussians nearby. The Allies had around 120,000, and the force of Prussians had around 30,000. Napoleon wanted to keep that contingent away from the Waterloo forces to prevent himself from facing a far larger army. Things began well. Some units won and pushed forward, and others were wiped out. By the end of the day, the Prussians had reunited with the Allied forces and drove the French off the field. At the end of the battle, Napoleon engaged his only fresh force left, his elite Imperial Guard. They fought to the death and most were wiped out. Napoleon was later banished to the island of St. Helena, where he lived for the rest of his days. Number 6. The Siege of Vienna, 1683. Throughout its history, the Ottoman Empire had tried to capture Vienna, the capital of Austria, and then the Habsburg Empire. In 1683, they tried once again to capture it, and this time they went all out, with possibly 150 to 200,000 men and 150 cannons. The Viennese garrison only had around 11,000 men, with 120 working guns. They had held out for around 2 months, and things looked desperate. They requested aid from any other European kingdom. A massive relief force of around 60,000 men came, with 20,000 being cavalry. The Germans came with about a third of the entire force. The rest were the Polish under King John Sobieski, along with 3,000 winged hussars, the Polish elite heavy cavalry. They charged down the hills of Vienna and drove the Ottomans off the field, and Vienna was saved. An interesting fact, some people believe that Tolkien based the siege of Minas Tirith off of this battle. Also, this battle contained the largest cavalry charge in history, with over 20,000 cavalry being used. This battle is also depicted excellently by the band Sabaton in their song Winged Hussars. Number 5. The Siege of Yorktown. In 1783, Washington had nearly achieved victory over the British. General Cornwallis was defending a small town in Virginia with only 8,000 men. Washington had an allied army of over 20,000. Cornwallis expected to get reinforcements from the sea, but the French had blockaded the port and Washington moved his army in front of them. He was trapped. It became a day and night artillery bombardment. Only a few months later, an American Continental Brigade moved in and captured British cannons and redoubts. Cornwallis then surrendered and the Americans won the Revolutionary War. Number 4. The Battle of Tours. In 732, the Umayyad Caliphate invaded the Frankish kingdom. They had crushed the Visigoths at the Battle of Guadalete over a decade earlier, and were focused on doing the same to the Franks. They had won some small victories, most with little resistance. However, on the way to Tours between Poitiers, they met resistance from King Charles. The Arab forces were mostly cavalry, while the Franks had mostly infantry with a small detachment of cavalry. They had done well, and at the end of the day, their cavalry attacked the Arab camp and later drove the Arabs off the field. Many historians note that had the battle gone differently, Islam would be Europe's main religion. From this victory, Charles kept his reputation of being a fierce warrior and splendid leader. Thus, he gained the nickname Charles Martel, or Charles the Hammer. Number 3. The Battle of Gettysburg. In July of 1863, Confederate General Robert Lee invaded the North with an army of 80,000. They went in through Pennsylvania. Lincoln ordered General Meade to counter the advance. The North arrived with an army of 95,000. They met in the small town of Gettysburg. It began with a light skirmish, but escalated into a full-on battle. It lasted for 3 days. At the end of the third, Lee's army was crushed and they retreated back into the South. This was a decisive turning point for the Union, who would go on to win many other battles and eventually the war. This was the bloodiest battle in American history, with over 50,000 men dead or wounded. It is now a national park, and there is a graveyard that holds the men who died there. Number 2. The Battle of Kenny. In 216 BC, Gaius Varro, along with a few other Roman generals, raised a massive army and attacked the small army of Hannibal to wipe him out for good. Hannibal had an army of around 40,000, and the Romans had twice that many. Hannibal formed his men in an inverted crescent shape, with his weakest infantry in the center. The Romans wiped out the weak men and kept pushing into the enemy force. Then Hannibal did the unthinkable and surrounded a large army with a lesser army. The Romans were wiped out, and only 3,000 of over 80,000 escaped. This left Rome totally defenseless, but they went on to win the rest of the Second Punic War, which this battle was in. Number 1. The Battle of Stalingrad. In 1942, Nazi Germany betrayed their alliance with Russia and invaded it, in order to show Europe that nothing could stop them from conquering the globe. In August of 1942, the Germans besieged the small town of Stalingrad. Within weeks, the defenses fell. However, if history has taught us anything, it's to always pay mercenaries and never invade Russia, unless you're the Mongols. Anyway, the Germans inflicted massive casualties on the Russians and took over most of the city. However, there were still pockets of resistance throughout it. That winter, the Germans suffered as they weren't prepared for the Russian winter. To make matters worse, there was a massive relief force coming to wipe the Germans out. Hitler sent supply drops to keep the Germans strong, but very few actually made it to the drop zone. Eventually, the Germans surrendered. It was an embarrassing defeat for them, but it gave the Allied forces hope that they would win the war, which they did. This is considered the largest battle of all time, as well as the bloodiest. The Russians suffered over 1 million casualties, and the Germans suffered hundreds of thousands. So there you have it. Thanks for watching, guys. If you like my content, hit the subscribe button and click on the bell for notifications. I'm Jimblecat, and I'll see you later.